you can't lose sight of your dreams. If there's something that you gravitate towards and something that lights you up and something that you know you love doing, like I love events, I love recording with people, I love connecting, I love social media. Do something every day, whether it's little, whether it's doing something like this, guest on a show, go to an event, take a different route, do something that makes you better at what you want to be good at what you want to do, at what you're passionate about. Talk to musicians if you love musicians, sign up for a guitar lesson, go to a place where creatives hang out. Take little steps towards those dreams because life is fast and life is so delicate.
Reena Friedman Watts, welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. How are you doing today?
I am so excited to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here on the podcast. And I see that you also have your own podcast. Can you share the name of the podcast that you have?
Yes, I have a podcast with my dad. He is my number one supporter and biggest fan. And he said, even if I only do the podcast for him, it is worth podcasting. So it's my special time with my dad. I interview guests, share the stories with him. And then at the end of every episode, he weighs in with his intergenerational perspective.
Cool. And the name of the podcast is?
Better Call Daddy.
I love it. I love the name. And I see that you have so many episodes, and I listen to it during my drive to work, on my walks. I love listening to podcasts. It always brightens up my day, especially at the end where we hear Daddy, your father, sharing his bits of wisdom and truth. But before we really dive into your podcast, I want to have an understanding of who you are and where did this journey into the podcasting world or into the world of being in front of cameras or show business or whatever. When did that actually start?
Yeah, ever since I was a little girl, I always love kind of putting on performances for my parents and my grandparents. In fact, when I was little, I would like line them up on the couch and sing over cassette tapes and make them all listen to me. And I think it really started young. And I went to a youth performing arts school for high school. And I loved being a part of a choir. I loved being in a creative environment. I felt like the kids that were either playing an instrument or singing were kind of my people. From there, I got a singing scholarship to college, and I went to a small school kind of where I could be like a big fish in a little pond. I spent 4 years being around extremely talented people where I actually did not get in on my first try. And so I never really feel like I was accepted or like I could sing out. And so when I got a couple offers from smaller schools, I like wanted that kind of coddling. And so I ended up at the University of Charleston in West Virginia for 2 years. I actually just recently refound the guy who gave me the scholarship there on Facebook. I need to like have him on my show. But yeah, he wanted me, he was after me, he was very like complimentary. And so that's just where I went. And I was the only Jewish girl in the whole college. And, I grew up being a Jew from the South where that was kind of a thing. Like there weren't many of us. We all knew each other. And I felt like an other. And going to a college where I was again that, I was like, I think I need to like go where there's other Jewish people and there's like I wanted a bigger school. And so I ended up transferring to Purdue
Okay.
my junior year. And there was a radio station on campus. And I walked in there and I was like, I want to work in radio. And then turns out they were looking for somebody to kind of work the morning shift, the weekend shift, the very early shift. And this was like pre-automation.
Mhm.
So I really learned a lot. I learned how to run the audio board. I learned how to load the features, put on live music if something needed to be brought on or there was a break in the programming. And I just love that environment. I would like sing and record myself and make air check tapes and kind of be like a DJ. So that was kind of the beginning.
Now, was your family or those who were around you, were they kind of surprised when you said, I want to be doing radio? Was that a shock to people?
That's a great question. I think it wasn't so much of a shock. They were kind of encouraging it. They thought it was a great opportunity, and it was a small station where I got to learn. It's funny, but I became friends with another girl who was in my communications class, and I ended up getting her a job, and she took over the job after I left, and then she went on. My best friend ended up going into media as well. I think if there's opportunities on campus for you to gain skills like that, it's a really great way to get started. And in fact, I wanted to work in radio after college. I actually made some air check tapes, sent them out to smaller stations. You know, it's hard to get into a big market right out of college. And I got a couple offers. I got an interview at WGN in Chicago, and I ended up driving up there, but I didn't get the job at that one. That would have been a huge market. But while I was up there, interviewing at WGN, I saw that Jerry Springer was looking for interns in the same courtyard. So that ended up being my start. I walked across to NBC Tower, I got an interview with the intern coordinator, and I started there right out of college, like 2 weeks later.
And how do you think that your upbringing, I mean, you said that earlier, you already had the microphone, you had your cassettes, you'd be singing in front of the family. How did that prepare you for not only the Jerry Springer show, but also for Better Call Daddy?
Yeah, that's such a great question. To be honest, even though I liked the microphone as a kid, and even though I liked performing for my family, I was scared in front of crowds. I was not one of those people that was like lit up by the audience. I much preferred like collaborating with other people and kind of blending in. And so that's why actually getting into production, I felt like was a better place for me. I liked casting the stories, I liked bonding with the guests, I liked coming up with the crazy titles and pitching the stories to the executives. Like that was exciting for me. And truthfully, coming from Kentucky, my dad worked in a factory. I heard those kinds of stories growing up. So it wasn't that far fetched from kind of my upbringing.
On the Jerry Springer show, a lot of people at the time, I mean, I was still, excuse me, I was still just a teenager, a youth. But I remember hearing a lot of people saying, "Oh, those things are exaggerated." But here I'm hearing that there's a lot of people who really do experience these things, these scenarios. And as a viewer, especially at the time, I would love watching like the chemistry. And sometimes with chemistry, there's explosions, and I would love these explosions. And at the end, it all comes down with Jerry's. I'm not sure how he is it final his final word or his
His
final.
final thought, yeah. And I kind of,
Oh,
to be
wow.
honest, I modeled my show after that. I was like, I can book wild and crazy stories or even everyday people that have never told their story. And there doesn't have to be an unhappy ending. Like my dad could weigh in with his final thought. That is exactly what Better Call Daddy's like stemmed from. And 20 years later, after starting my career at the Jerry Springer Show, I actually got to interview him. It was very special. Jerry is my episode number 210. And to be honest, after I interviewed him, I was like, oh my God, I could be done. Like anybody else is like icing on the cake. Like he totally validated my idea and thought it was really creative and cool. And for me, that was enough.
He was I mean, I miss him even though I didn't really know, I never knew him personally, but hearing him give his final thought, I always loved it. So when people were asking like what kind of TV do you watch as a kid, I would say I watch Jerry Springer. And it's like, well, why are you watching Jerry Springer? And I would be honest, his final thought, it was just so it's it was just wisdom filled moments that he would give every night. And I would enjoy those moments. But now I wanted to ask you from your experience on the show, was there ever a story or a guest who stands out in your memory?
Oh, so many. And back to his final thoughts, to be honest, I think he wrote most of those. I mean, he was a witty guy. And what he came up with, like his funny little sayings on the fly to these different stories that he was hearing, I loved that part. He was so quick on his feet. He really was unique to the show. It was so great. And I feel like he was really the head of reality TV. Like everything reality TV kind of stemmed from that. Like he was so original in the stories that he covered.
Oh yeah.
Some of my favorite guests, I've actually kept in touch with some guests for over 20 years. This is actually crazy, but a girl that I had on my podcast, she was a little person and she came on the show because her boyfriend was cheating. And we have kept in touch for over 20 years. Like she's now a mom. She and I have gone through having kids together and like, other relationships coming and going. And, me living in different cities, her living in different cities. And she has one kid who is normal size, or I don't even know the, PC way of saying that, and one who's a little person, and just the struggles of that. Um, and then, one dad wanted to be involved and one didn't, and what was that like? So that was one of my favorite guests. Her name is Cher. That one is on my YouTube channel. I just love her. I wish that we could reunite in real life. She was one of my craziest stories because she like flashed the audience and like went after the other girl and was just the crowd loved her. The crowd loved her to the point where we took her to Jamaica. Like, I don't know if you remember, like Jerry went to Jamaica for spring break a couple years. I got to do that. And like she was afraid to fly. She had never been on an airplane before. I was afraid to fly when the pilot was smoking weed and we were in a Cessna, you know what I mean? So we just like we went through some crazy chapters together and like kept in touch. And I just feel like that was a very special time and just a very special connection. So I love that story. And then another guy, he was on Jerry 20 years ago when he was like a 70-pound baby. And
Mhm.
20 years later, they had him on as like an update guest. And so I interviewed him 20 years later. And I feel like he got a happy ending too, because Jerry helped him find a geneticist that could like tell him about his disability or what he had. And like Jerry took a special interest in him. He also had, his name is Zachary. He was like big baby Zach. So he had Zach's mom on, had Zach on, and followed them for a 20-year story that I thought was really special and cool. So I interviewed baby Zach 20 years later. I had a pretty hefty first baby myself. He was over 30 pounds at 1 year, and that alone was backbreaking. I'm like, I don't know how your mom did 70 pounds. I could barely get this kid in the crib. You know what I mean? So he had the same thing I think that Andre the Giant had. And he's had a
Mm,
lot of health problems from it, but his positivity and his resilience and what he's done to keep healthy is just beautiful.
Thank you for sharing all that. And I don't recall Jerry in Jamaica, but I do remember him going to Hollywood. And I remember going, I mean, I grew up in LA and I remember going with my brother around Hollywood, and I was looking outside as a little kid to see if I spot Jerry. I was probably like 10 years old, but I was like, I want to see Jerry Springer, I was always a big fan. But something that I love that you brought up was that these people, they have stories, they have character, and sadly, many people see the Jerry Springer show or the guest as perhaps as not worthy of a story or not to be having a microphone. But what inspired me about Jerry was giving people a platform. And it's just so inspiring that you've kept in touch with some of these guests. And now I wanted to go to your new endeavor, the Better Call Daddy. How do you think that your experience on the Jerry Springer show, how did that help you evolve? And what did you carry with that experience onto this new program, this new show, Better Call Daddy?
In the beginning of my podcasting career with my dad, I thought that I needed to book like wild and crazy stories like Jerry. I reached out to somebody that was like former KKK and now wanted to be a Jew. I reached out to a girl who, Brianne Davis, who was like, wrote a book about sex addiction. I went after all these like taboo subjects or controversial subjects. But what I realized, like what you just said, is that everyday people have overcome amazing things. And if I stick to the daddy through line, there's something there. That's what I started noticing is like sometimes I interviewed a guy, Johnny Spoiler, who he had been podcasting since 2013 and he had never talked about his personal story. He did like reactions to horror films, or, I interviewed another guy that did like comedic reactions to 80s sitcoms. And there's all these people doing like very creative podcasts, but if they ever told their personal story, if they ever talked about their relationship with their dad, that is a unique angle. And so I have found interviewing daddy's girls or inspirational fathers or anybody that maybe lacks a relationship with their dad has brought in me just stories that I never would have expected to connect to that have also been amazing.
And it's amazing also that your father is so supportive and that he's involved with you, because there are some parents and children who they don't want to get involved in their work. But here you are working together. And I'm so curious to finding out, how was it that your father got involved in this whole podcasting world?
My dad is literally who I call every day. Like that is how the show started is like, he was an entrepreneur. He worked with his parents for 40 plus years. I was always going to him for advice, and I felt like he was giving me good advice in my own life, like in my relationship and, how do you get a client? How do you price your services? How do you get more than one client? How do you scale? How do you get rid of a bad client? I was asking him all of these types of questions. And I was like, wow, well, he gives great advice, but not only could he give great advice that I could share with the world, but I bet other people could like add to our wisdom rating too. You know? So that's honestly how it started. I was working for a podcaster, Kathy Heller. She has a huge following, host of Don't Keep Your Day Job. And my dad was in LA, like on business when I was 7 months pregnant working for her and like putting out all of her sponsorship tables and managing her green room and helping her put on this 350 person event. And my dad was like, oh my God, he had knew I had had a miscarriage in the past. So he was like, I'm going to extend my business trip. I'll be your PA, your production assistant. I'll help you manage the tables and the heavy packages. And like, my dad is my right hand. He's always been, who I go to. And so I just knew he wouldn't back out on me. And in fact, I probably wouldn't have 400 episodes if my dad didn't push me every week. My dad literally tells me, he was like, if you're just doing this for me, keep going. He was like, that's reason enough to do this. He was like, it is so meaningful, the time that we've had together and to have this project in my 40s and in my dad's late 60s to. He's listened to over 400 hours of me talking to people. I mean, if that's not special time, what is?
That's dedication right there.
What parent does that? I mean, he knows me so damn well. We have broached subjects that I don't think we ever would have having started this project.
And starting this project, what are some of the main challenges that you've had to go through together, you and your father, to have this podcast be what it is today?
It's such a great question. I mean, little things like I'm like, Dad, you need a mic. Dad, stop pointing the camera up your nose. Dad, like I remember in the beginning, he's like, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Like every time he'd get on. And I made like a funny behind the scenes track of that, of like my dad literally coming on about 50 different times and 50 different outfits with the camera up his nose. Like, can you hear me? Am I on? Am I recording? Am I recording? So it's just little things like that, but you get better. And still, look, my dad has got a Yeti mic. In the beginning, he was using Apple earbuds. I've taught him how to get onto different platforms like Riverside, like Zoom, like Squadcast, because people use different recording platforms. So I'm keeping my dad young, I'm making him more savvy. Um, could he get a better background? Could I get better lighting? Could I get a better camera? Could he get a better camera? All of these things are upgrades, but the thing is we're doing it and we're showing people the whole journey. So I would say, some of the obstacles have been he takes care of his mother in Florida. He flies there once a month. He's recording on the road. He doesn't know always how to keep his face in frame. He doesn't always put the mic in the right position, but none of that matters if you have a mic, if you say unique things, if you're vulnerable. All those things trump the tech.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. I'm really loving having you here on my podcast. It's just such an honor, and I follow your podcast, so it's just an inspiration. And um, to kind of start wrapping things up, because you've shared your journey from childhood to going to school, being in Kentucky, then all of this to being with Jerry Springer to today, getting all of this, your background, your life, what would you say is your truth that heals? Your truth that you've learned in life. What is your truth that heals?
So, like we were saying before we hopped on here to record, I feel like, I've moved around a lot. Oh my God. Like I started off in Kentucky, then I went to West Virginia, Indiana, Chicago, Palo Alto. I mean, I've lived so many places and there's so many transitions, and you can't lose sight of your dreams. And my truth that heals is like, if there's something that you gravitate towards and something that lights you up and something that you love doing, like I love events, I love recording with people, I love connecting, I love social media. Do something every day, whether it's little, whether it's doing something like this, guest on a show, go to an event, take a different route, do something that makes you better at what you want to be good at what you want to do, at what you're passionate about. Talk to musicians if you love musicians, sign up for a guitar lesson, go to a place where creatives hang out. Take little steps towards those dreams because life is fast and life is so delicate. And, you know, I want more of those experiences in my own life.
Well, thank you so much, Rena, for sharing your truth. And truly, I'm inspired because when I first started this journey, I felt like I couldn't speak. It was just so scary. Like, oh, I need a special mic, or I gotta have the lights, or how can I start? But I just did it anyways. And it's having you sharing your truth and not only having potential, but getting to work and making it happen, making these dreams become a reality, ready or not. Your truth is an inspiration, and your show is an inspiration. And I wanted to thank you for all that you do.
Aw, I am totally inspired by you. I was listening to you and I'm like, I can't believe he just started. And I love how you talk to the audience and how you make the guest feel. And this is definitely a talent. I mean, I can tell this is in your wheelhouse because you're a great interviewer. You make people feel good. You ask great questions. You sound professional. So please keep it up.
Well, I have to give thanks to you and to Jerry. Rest in peace to Jerry Springer, because this was actually part of helped to form my idea for this podcast, because it's, the ending is, what is your truth that heals? It's like the final thought, but sometimes I don't have a final thought. So okay, if I had Jerry Springer here, I would ask him for his final thought, and that would be the truth, his truth that heals, whatever it would have been. But yeah, he was an inspiration. And so, again, thank you for being here on the podcast. And where can people who are listening in the audience, where can they find more of your work?
BetterCallDaddy.com, and on most social media like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, I am under Reena Friedman Watts.
Well, thank you so much. And to the audience, go check out Better Call Daddy podcast. I love it. I listen to it as much as I can. And I strongly suggest you put it on your playlist, on your saved, follow it. And Reena, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. I had an awesome time.